Tell me if you've heard this one before. The latest offering from the Marvel Cinematic Universe is complete and utter trash. Sound a bit like a broken record? Well, believe you me, noble viewer, it saddens me to say it every time, but reality is reality. By the time you get to Nick Fury making out with a Skrull, the cringe factor will make you go full McConnell. Secret Invasion, the newest addition to the 5 million MCU-related television shows dumped onto Disney Plus over the past couple years, is a waste of time, money, and talent that you won't regret ignoring. And by the looks of the viewership numbers, it seems like a lot of you did just that. For those who have watched it, Secret Invasion has proven to be one of those few times a year when everyone unites in hating the same thing. There doesn't appear to be any defenders of this show. It's being universally derided, and rightfully so. It joins the ranks of Velma and Peter Pan and Wendy as pieces of media that brought together the right, left, center, up, down, and sideways to crap all over a terrible product in unison. If there's one positive thing to take away from Secret Invasion, it's that. While the director employs the standard Disney deflection by blaming the fans for actually expecting the show to not be a piece of shit, the show fails on nearly every level except the acting. The sad part about the series is that the actors are giving everything they have, doing what they can with what they're given. There are a number of moments with Samuel L. Jackson where he has that old Nick Fury charm, infused with his Sammy J-isms that make you crack a smile from time to time. And like most Marvel productions, the supporting cast is filled out with top-notch actors. It's the script, concept, and execution that absolutely fails them at every turn, that makes the whole thing just sad to watch. The very premise of the film is completely messed up from the start. It's supposed to be a spy thriller, but there is absolutely zero intrigue in this boring-ass show. Secret Invasion was originally an event and crossover series in Marvel Comics, and the show botches every aspect of that series that made it memorable and fun. The conflict that's set up to get the story moving is also just absolutely ridiculous and disregards so many events, scenarios, and places from past Marvel movies that would have solved everything in a millisecond. And all of this is horribly executed, with a script that tells you everything that's about to happen before it does. So any potential tension is absolutely crushed. Character motivations are also beyond idiotic, and editing and effects that will make you cringe. The MCU will never live down the laugh-inducing Drax arm on poor Emilia Clarke. Have you ever Googled yourself and were shocked to find your personal information on one of those public listing sites? Yeah, me too. Googling my name, I can find my previous addresses, workplaces. It's creepy and feels incredibly intrusive. Data brokers are making a fortune selling our information to robocallers, spammers, and others who want to learn more about us, like where we live. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura. Aura can identify data brokers exposing your info and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. Brokers are legally required to remove your info if you ask them to, but they make it super hard to do, and Aura will handle it for you. You can try Aura free for 2 weeks using my link, and Aura does so much more to protect you from online threats you can't see. It's really easy to set up, so you don't have to download several different apps to get things like parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. You get everything at one affordable price. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online, so you can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. You can let people continue to exploit and profit off your private info, or you can go to my link right here to start your 2-week free trial. Also linked in the description. Before we dive into the sad details of this utter failure, the plot boils down to this. Nick Fury is a broken down, old version of the Fury we once knew and loved. Skrulls, shape-shifting aliens who were introduced in the Captain Marvel movie, and you'll be forgiven if you've forgotten about that, are living on Earth waiting for Fury to find them a new planet to live on. Well, some of them have just gotten real impatient that he hasn't done that, and one of them named Gravik has decided to ignite World War III because Fury hasn't kept his little promise. So after humans are wiped out, the Skrulls will take our place and make Earth their permanent home. That story setup will probably tingle the suspicions of any discerning viewer. That sounds awfully stupid, you might say. Well, you'd be 100% correct. But there's a problem before we even get to the plot issues. The show failed to deliver on its premise of being a spy thriller. Secret Invasion was supposed to be a return to glory, so to speak. The glory of Captain America the Winter Soldier, which is still one of the best of the MCU, and honestly just a great movie in general. Winter Soldier was a spy thriller. It moved at a rapid-fire pace, taking a lot of inspiration from the Jason Bourne films, staying as grounded as possible for a movie about a lead with superpowers and keeping the audience guessing. In Cap 2, the government, and specifically S.H.I.E.L.D., had been infiltrated by Hydra, and it played up the paranoia, keeping Captain America and the viewer wondering who was and wasn't part of the conspiracy. This is exactly how Secret Invasion was being advertised and sold. A spy thriller, a show dripping with paranoia and subversion of expectations. Who would be a Skrull? Who was on our side? Considering where Captain Marvel left off, why would the Skrulls be turning against humans? This was supposed to be a show filled with mystery, intrigue, and revelations. Even the concept is a mirror image of Winter Soldier. Instead of Hydra having infiltrated all aspects of government and people close to Captain America, it's the Skrulls infiltrating positions of power and humans close to Nick Fury. And despite how terrible the MCU has been since Phase 4 started, with a couple notable exceptions, even I was still willing to give this one a chance. Nick Fury, especially as played by Samuel L. Jackson, is a beloved character. And returning to what worked in Winter Soldier, I was absolutely going to give this one a shot. Regardless of the setup, it couldn't even deliver on the most basic aspects of a spy thriller, let alone keep the audience guessing. In fact, it didn't even try. Some of the best moments of Winter Soldier were when Steve Rogers was uncovering secrets or having revelations dropped on him. Conversations between characters were filled with tense dialogue. The action set pieces we remember, the elevator fight, the knife and shield fight between Cap and Bucky, none of them would have mattered as much if they hadn't been set up so well by how the script handled its characters and their interactions. There was real build-up to those moments. Secret Invasion doesn't do anything like that. Instead of building tension, it completely telegraphs what's coming before a scene even starts. It can't even begin to subvert expectations, because you're just explicitly shown what a character is up to, told what their motivations are through boring exposition, and you are never guessing who is a Skrull and who isn't because you're just told or shown immediately.
Watch very carefully now. There it is. Let's see that again. Very, very disturbing.
The way to handle a mystery story is right there, and they drop the ball. Take the opening scene from episode 1, for example. You know who the Skrull is because it telegraphs it immediately before Martin Freeman's character begins interacting with the other actor in the scene. And they didn't have to do that. In fact, if the scene hadn't started with it basically telling us who the Skrull is, it could have been pretty tense because the way the characters are speaking, with them filled with their own paranoia, it would have kept the audience guessing. Instead, it's clear from the start that Martin Freeman is a Skrull right off the bat, and we just sit and wait for the scene to finish playing out. This happens constantly throughout the entire show. Any hint of nuance or subtlety seems like it was purposefully avoided, because that sort of thing is difficult to do, so they just ran with the most by-the-numbers plot possible, and hoped the action scenes and muted color palette would make you think this is a serious spy thriller. The show doesn't even allow you to guess who is and isn't a Skrull when it comes to heads of state. Within the first couple episodes, there's a scene where there's a meeting between people in positions of power and the villain of the show, Gravik, and they reveal themselves as Skrulls during that scene, so boom. There, now you know from here on out. No guessing, no ifs, ands, or buts, just here you go, viewer, eat it up. Even the one revelation that should be shocking, and I'll get to why the choice to make this person a Skrull is terrible later in the video, when Rhodey is revealed as a Skrull, it's not even done within the confines of the story. It just shows him alone, getting out of the shower, and wiping a mirror, and you see a Skrull on the other side. No big reveal, no big revelation to Nick Fury, no tension, just completely wasted on a gimmicky shot. The best I can describe how lame this was is it's like the director hoped it looked cool, and that would be enough for us. The setups that the show does manage to get off the ground don't have payoffs. At first, it seems like Emilia Clarke's character, the daughter of Talos, was going to be a villain, but it's revealed quickly that she's helping her father, so whatever, I guess. There were so many things this show had going for it, and they fumbled the ball every single time. It's like a softball being thrown to an MLB batter at 50 miles per hour, and they swing and just fucking miss over and over and over. Outside the show not delivering on its promise to be a paranoia-infused spy thriller, let's get back to Nick Fury not keeping his promise, which is the foundation for the conflict in the show. In the 90s, Nick Fury promised the Skrulls that he'd find another planet for them to call home, but he and Carol Danvers hadn't been able to by the time the Avengers Initiative began, and then he unfortunately got blipped, and upon his return still couldn't find a planet for them. And while he was blipped, Talos had sent out a call to all remaining Skrulls, meaning there are at least 1 million of them living on the planet at this point. Gravik, the villain of the show, is pissed off that Fury hasn't kept his promise yet. He speaks for all Skrulls in saying that they want to be able to live in their own skin and not hide as humans, so he wants to incite World War III, have the humans destroy each other, then the Skrulls can rule the planet. If this sounds absolutely fucking stupid, it's because it is. Let us count the ways. First, let's look at logic and logistics. You basically have to erase most of what you've seen in the MCU from your memory in order for any of this to make sense. The superheroes of Earth are now friends with the Guardians of the Galaxy, so why couldn't they get their help in finding an uninhabited planet? Or why not ask if the Skrulls can live with them on Nowhere? Or hey, how about that planet Thanos was on at the beginning of Endgame? That was Earth-like and completely uninhabited. Seems like that would be a perfect spot. But the show constantly repeats lines regarding Nick Fury's failure to find a planet exactly like that. In addition, how is inciting World War III so that the Skrulls can rule the planet the logical step here? Because someone didn't keep their promise, the over-the-top villain wants to commit genocide and wipe out an entire species, 8 billion people, so that 1 million Skrulls can inhabit the Earth. The Skrulls have taken full advantage of the hospitality given to them by Fury, all of the wonders and cushy living brought on by first world countries, which requires the symbiotic relationship of billions of people to keep up. Instead, Gravik thinks it's a great idea to live in the aftermath of a World War III, a nuclear wasteland that would destroy anything and everything. That's way better than living on the Thanos planet from Endgame. And why is World War III the way to go? Infiltrating the highest forms of government across the world would have been more logical and far more interesting. That sort of plot would have given more opportunity for it to be the spy thriller it was advertised as, and there was already a blueprint with Hydra and Captain America Winter Soldier. But instead, just like the action, the show goes the generic route. Bad guy wants to wipe out mankind. Wow. Fascinating. And it does so in the most contrived, boring, mindless way possible. The premise and conflict of Secret Invasion are completely messed up and wasted, and these are two foundational elements for a story. If the foundation is crumbling from the get-go, you're in for a rough ride. And if any MCU fan got a whiff of this stank-ass fart of a concept before the show was out, there would have been major pushback. Maybe that's why MCU stories are kept under wraps, so Redditors and YouTubers don't make the writers look bad by providing better concepts. The only buzz from this show stemmed from Samuel L. Jackson leading the way, reprising his role as Fury, and that's completely bumbled too. There are flashes of brilliance with Jackson hamming it up, but that's few and far between and nowhere near good enough to recommend anyone watch this pile of trash. Just like the script going with generic beats, how the show utilizes Nick Fury is trope-filled, standard stuff you've seen 100 times when dealing with older characters. I can't remember exactly how many times Nick Fury is called old, or how many lines of dialogue there are saying that he isn't the Fury he used to be, but it's a lot. The script drives the point home over and over again that he's old and useless and can't do anything on his own, which is mind-numbing because that's not Nick Fury. Jackson's take on the character is lauded because the Fury of the past is ready for anything. He's 12 steps ahead of everyone, and whenever we thought he was down, he was actually up. He had a mystique about him that kept him interesting to viewers, and the decision to do the modern standard of deconstructing his character was a terrible decision. We've seen this done time and again, and it hardly ever plays out well. The only time I can think of where this worked was in Logan, but here we get the Luke Skywalker treatment for Fury. The MCU has utilized the character as a guiding force behind the scenes, and I think that's where Fury shines. Setting him as the lead of a TV show sounds good on paper, but the character works best in supporting roles. It's kind of like Hannibal Lecter. Most of the time, it's best not knowing much about him because he works best when he's shrouded in mystery. I don't mind Fury having a bit of a love story here in the series. Yes, it's executed terribly, but the idea isn't bad. But once it becomes a cornerstone of the show, it gets embarrassingly bad, and I wish they hadn't bothered. Once again, behold Nicholas Fury kissing a Skrull and cringe before your MCU overlords. Other players in the show don't escape character assassination, with Maria Hill literally being assassinated. The saddest part about that character is that she never really got to be one. What we knew about Hill was she was incredibly loyal to Fury, his right-hand man, or woman, and whenever she was on screen, it was comforting. Like Fury, she was used as a through line to unite different areas of the MCU, and whenever Fury popped up, you knew Hill was right behind him. Killing off a well-known or beloved character isn't and shouldn't be off limits. As long as it serves the story, I think most things are fair game. It's always in the execution. If it's done well, then it's done well. But Secret Invasion doesn't get much right, so how do you think they handled Maria Hill's death? She's unceremoniously killed off at the end of the first episode for shock factor, and that's pretty much it. The response from the 8 people who actually watched the show should be enough proof that they executed this poorly. No one complained that Tony Stark died in Endgame. It made sense, it was poetic, and it was well done. Here, the response to Hill's death was, really? That's what you chose to do? Whose death in the show doesn't come so much as a shock as it does obligatory. They do the same with Talos. His usefulness came to an end and they just have him die with no emotional weight behind it. But the person who gets the most aggressive shit end of the stick has to be poor Rhodey, and by proxy, the remaining fans of the MCU. Revealing Rhodey as a Skrull isn't the issue. It's the length of time it's suggested he's been one. In episode 6, it's heavily suggested that Rhodey has been a Skrull since the end of Captain America's Civil War. See, when the real Rhodey was found, he's unable to walk because he hasn't gone through rehabilitation since his injury at the hands of Falcon. This is all meant for shock value and nothing more. There's absolutely no regard for the ramifications of this revelation. So you mean to tell me that everything Rhodey's been through since Civil War hasn't actually happened to him? He hasn't actually experienced? So Rhodey doesn't even know that his best friend Tony Stark is dead. He doesn't know about Thanos or the blip. So the emotional weight of the scene where Pepper, Spidey, and Rhodey have to say goodbye to their loved one was actually Pepper, Spidey, and a random Skrull saying goodbye to Tony. This is worse than the scene in Loki when they decided to say Infinity Stones were just paperweights. It's a blatant disregard for the past, things the audience was emotionally invested in, for the sake of shock value. And this kind of writing is pathetically lazy and shows whoever wrote it gave absolutely no thought into what this sort of thing means. Out of everything wrong with Secret Invasion, this is probably the most egregious thing of all. The final episode received the worst overall rating of any MCU project ever, and for good reason. It's a cringe fest on every conceivable level, from writing decisions to the effects, editing, and even the acting. It's a pathetic excuse for an end to a $200 million plus project. The MCU has had some pretty abysmal moments, but they will absolutely never live down the shitfest that was the final fight between Gaia and Gravik. See, Gravik wanted what amounts to a serum that has all of the Avengers' DNA in it so he can inject all the Skrulls with it, turning them into Super Skrulls with all the powers of the Avengers. At random points in the fight, the combatants turn certain parts of their body into those of other heroes. Their arms become a tree like Groot's, or the hilariously idiotic looking part when Gaia turns her arm into Drax's, covered in tattoos and all, so apparently he was born with them. It's goofiness to an extreme. It gets so ridiculous that when they turn an arm into Ebony Maws, who is one of Thanos' Black Order in Infinity War, it has the rings on his fingers. I guess just like Drax was apparently born with tattoos, the ring on his hands are part of Maws' DNA. So what exactly would they be getting with Tony Stark's DNA, for example? Not just his intellect, but his armor? Maybe with Cap, they'd get his shield? It's beyond illogical and just makes you shake your head in acknowledgement that a once great franchise has sunk this low. MCU movies were never highbrow entertainment, but this is beyond ridiculous and any suspension of disbelief has been completely killed off. Like we're an MCU side character at this point. And we're left with Gaia, played by Emilia Clarke, as the most powerful hero in the MCU. And the hilarious part is I'm sure we'll never see her again, because she's not signed on to more MCU projects, so just like no one has mentioned a giant celestial sticking out of the earth after the events of Eternals, this whole thing will be forgotten as well. As the MCU expands, it's getting more and more difficult to keep track of everything and make sure there aren't any logic gaps. But when fans point this out, it's shocking to realize the writers didn't think of major events or how certain things contradict past ones. The only conclusion you can come to is that they simply don't care. Secret Invasion is an adaptation in name only. It takes the name of a beloved crossover event from the Marvel Comics series, and that's pretty much it. Now, that's not a terrible thing in practice. Captain America Civil War was an adaptation of the Civil War comic book event, and they couldn't be more different in terms of size and scope. The comic books had hundreds, if not thousands, of characters to work with, so the storyline took place on a massive scale, even involving other dimensions. At the time, the MCU wasn't nearly as broad, so it was a much smaller story. But what it had going for it was the main characters were the same in both the comic book and movie versions. Cap and Iron Man were the big players, and Spider-Man played a role in both. The movie also did a great job of keeping the heart of the conflict front and center, so even though it wasn't even close to a one-to-one adaptation, it still felt like Civil War. Secret Invasion doesn't do that at all. The TV show isn't anything like the comic book in any way. Major players in the comic are heroes who are either dead or retired in the MCU, so the only thing similar to the comic is the title. For something that's supposed to be an Earth-ending level threat, the show feels decidedly small-scale too. Nick Fury continent hops, but it just feels inconsequential. I understand bringing Chris Evans back or having any major cameos would be cost prohibitive, but it makes me question where that massive budget went then, because the effects don't look top dollar by any stretch, and the cast isn't filled with with exclusively A-listers or anything. This sort of thing means any scroll revelation would be of characters we don't really care about, which would mean the writing would have to be extremely strong to make up for the lack of true aha moments, which it fails to do at every turn. Maybe the saddest part of the Secret Invasion debacle is that the director of the show has gone on the defensive. I simply don't understand this strategy, but Disney isn't alone in doing it, where a writer, director, actor, or even studio head will come out and not just defend a poorly received product, but will actively attack the fans that pay their bills. How many times have you heard someone from Hollywood come out and tell you it's the fans' fault for why something failed? Remember the Bros situation earlier this year, when the writer-director blamed straight people for why his movie bombed? How many times has a show or movie blamed racism, misogyny, or whatever other buzzword for its failures and bad ratings? Well, Secret Invasion joins the club. Thankfully, this time around, it's not culture war related, but the director of Secret Invasion had this to say. "Oh, I don't read reviews, with all due respect. For me, I view all the storytelling work I do as a dialogue with the audience. I don't know, is it our job to fulfill their expectations?" To answer your question, yes, it is your job to fulfill expectations. He's painting this with a broad brush, like we expect X and Y from a story every single time. And that couldn't be further from the truth. What people expect is that a show isn't a complete piece of shit with blatant disregard and disdain for the things that came before it. The things that came before it are the reason people are watching it. People also expect to be given what is promised. If you say the show is a spy thriller engulfed in paranoia, and then you don't deliver that, what else would you expect as a response? This sort of narcissistic, mind-numbing dialogue is why a lot of people don't give a shit whatsoever that most of Hollywood is on strike. The level of ego and ignorance spewing out of the people producing shitty work is sickening, and people get fed up with it. The attacks from Hollywood make it seem like these things are just free, and we should take what we're given and say thank you. Well, a movie ticket costs about $15 now, and people pay for a monthly subscription to a streaming service. This is a consumer-based society, and people have to pay for these things. If they don't like what they pay for, they have every right to say so, and also every right to move on to something worth their time. No one owes Hollywood anything, and it's high time these people get their head out of their collective asses and gain some humility. That'll be the day, huh?
I've had it with these motherfucking
GG's.
snakes on this motherfucking plane.